These are the graphs we will be using in numeracy. A line graph, which shows a trend, in this case temperature. A simple bar chart when you're plotting a limited number of items. A compound bar chart to compare 2 or 3 different items. And finally a pie chart to show the proportion of spending, in this case someone's budget, how much they spend on rent compared to council tax, for example. This is an example of a line graph. The main point to remember about line graphs is that they show a trend. In this particular example, it's a trend of patient's temperature between 9 AM and 6 PM. So if you look at the axes, we need to label them. Remember, we're monitoring the temperature and we're taking readings every 3 hours. So we can look at the trend and see how the patient is doing. In this particular case here, we do not start the graph at 0, we start at 36 degrees because the temperature of the patient will be in quite a narrow band. So starting at 36 degrees makes perfect sense here, and you can see it's going up in 0.1s. Okay, so we can plot a fairly accurate graph and see straight away how the patient is doing. Where would you use a graph like this, not in a hospital but maybe in your own business? Well, you could have a graph, for example, of sales figures. It could be sales figures every month, every quarter, every year. It could be a graph of profits. And the main thing is to see the trend. Are your profits and sales increasing? How are they doing from one period to the next? So this is a basic example of a line graph. This is an example of a simple bar chart. It shows how much was spent on sandwiches, fruit and drinks at an office meeting. Where would you use a simple bar chart? Well, for example, if you had a small business, you could have a graph of sales of your top selling products, or you could have a graph of sales of your top selling employees. This is a compound bar chart where we're comparing the output of 3 different kinds of products. You can see we have a key here to identify the different products. We've given it a title, which is always very important. People worry about the title, but in general, what's it about? All right. We've labelled our axes, so it's thousands of units, and this is years along the bottom. The scale here, we could choose something like 1s, 5s, 10s, 20s, 50s, 100s. What you need to do is decide what's the biggest number you're plotting and then pick a suitable scale so that it will fill the page. You wouldn't go up in 7s or 9s, for example. So 1s, 2s, 5s, 10s, 20s, and so on, something like that. So this is an example of a compound bar chart. Where would you use this in the real world? If you had 3 different people working for you, you could compare their sales figures over the years. If you were selling 3 different kinds of products in a salon, for example, you can compare the sales figures. So these kinds of charts are useful. It tells a story. You can see how things are going. How is one product compared to another? How is one salesperson's figures compared to another? So they are quite useful. This is an example of a pie chart. It shows how someone spends their money. You can see the relative proportions of their spending. The biggest slice goes on rent. You could use this with your own business. You could have all of your products listed and show which ones are the biggest sellers, what proportion of your sales they represent.